This is the introduction. I'm going to pass it off to Lynn, who will give a little bit of a presentation on Act 1 EQS, and we'll do a bit of activity there as well. And then we'll do an activity about preparing testimony for the state board. And we'll chat about taking actions. And then at 6 o'clock, folks are welcome to jump off, or folks are welcome to stay on for optional Q&A. And for security reasons, and because we're recording, for right now, you'll have to use your raise hand function or say stack in the chat to introduce yourself. And let me make Amanda a co-host too, actually. And Amanda, let me just make you co-host. If you just want to say a very quick hello. I think I made you a co-host. Yeah, there you go.
Hi, my name is Amanda Garces. I am the chair of the working group. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. And do you want me to say anything else, Alisa?
Not for now. She'll be around during the Q&A if you're able to stay, Amanda. And so folks have specific questions for you, that'd be a great time to ask those.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for hosting this and for doing this.
All right, so we're gonna do a quick assessment of prior knowledge just to see kind of in the room. I know folks have different knowledge of this. And so from a 1 to 5 scale, and I'll stop the share so we can see everyone, I'd love to know, you can either use your hands, 1 being I know nothing at all, this is a really new conversation to me, or 5, someone like Amanda or Lynn, I know a lot, I could lead this training. So either with your video or in the chat, let's kind of see where we are as a group in terms of learning. And the goal today will be, if you're at a 1, to get you to at least a 2 or 3. And if you're at a 3, move you to a 4. So go ahead and put your hands up or share in the chat. And I see some 1s and 3s in the chat. Some 3s and 5s and 4s. All right, so we have folks at all different places, and we will have some time to work together today. And so hopefully there'll be some space to learn together and with each other. See a 2 coming in. Cool, and then I'm gonna go ahead and pass it off to Lynn. And Lynn, you can just let me know when you want me to go to the next slide. And I think you should be able to unmute. Let's see, there you go.
I did. Okay, so the first thing is, what is Act 1? It's a 2019 Vermont law creating the Act 1 working group, also known as the Ethnic Studies and Social Equity Working Group. Act 1 was advocated for by a coalition of BIPOC, LGBTQIA+, and people with disabilities to further education justice in Vermont. I don't know if any of you might not be aware of the definitions of those acronyms. BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, and people of color. LGBTQIA+, where are my notes? They keep adding initials. Alyssa,
I'm happy to help out too, if I know them all. Let's see, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans. Q for queer, I think. Intersex and asexual is my best at that.
Thank you. And so to understand that there's a lot of different people and groups feeding into this. Next slide. So the purpose of the Act 1 working group is to review statutes, policies, and government rules and make recommendations for updates, mainly focusing on a rule called the Vermont Education Quality Standards, and to review and identify ways that state educational standards, and these are content area standards, which are different than the EQS, can better represent the history, point of view, and experiences of different ethnic and social groups. Next slide. So who is the Act 1 working group? So this involves people who are state leaders, high school students, and community members, and people that care deeply about education in Vermont. Half were selected by the EDJ Coalition to represent diverse communities, and half are education stakeholders in Vermont, such as the representative of the Vermont Principals Association. So there's a little section you can click on that says learn more here. And that will probably list, I'm assuming that will probably list a variety of the different associations that are involved in this. Next slide. The definition of education quality standards. It's a government rule for all Vermont schools that act as a broad guide, highlighting important values for our schools and giving direction to school districts as they develop their own curriculum and choose their learning materials. Next slide. So, which brings us to the question of who decides what students learn. So education quality standards are like a map. They guide schools so that all students learn the same core skills and have environments where they feel safe and can thrive. Individual school districts use the standards to create their own curriculum, choose their own materials, and develop lessons that meet their community's needs. The goal of the EQS is to ensure that all learners in Vermont have a strong learning environment that supports them in reaching their goals. Next slide.
So Lynn just shared a bunch of information about what is EQS and what is Act 1. And so we have time for a couple of questions, and folks can either use the raise hand function or type stack in the chat. And Amanda, you should also feel free to chime in during these questions. So we'll open it up now just for a couple questions if folks have any questions. All right, so if there's no questions now, we're going to jump back into the presentation. Feel free to share those in the chat. We can get them along the way or get them at the end. So Lynn, you want to keep going for a few more and then I'll do the activity?
Sure. Education Quality Standards, EQS updates. What the Act 1 working group has been working on. Next slide. So what we're looking at are things like teaching practices, support services, educator training, feedback with communities, accessibility, and school district monitoring. Next slide. The Act 1 working group reviewed EQS to make sure it guides schools to promote critical thinking around the history, contributions, and viewpoints of many different ethnic and social groups, to encourage students to explore questions about ethnic and social identities, as well as issues around equality and racism. They're designed to provide welcoming spaces for all students and to help them develop pathways for families to talk about their child's experiences related to race, ethnic, or social group identity at school. Next slide. Many of the recommended EQS updates may already be in policy and/or practice in Vermont schools. This effort is working to officially make these changes in the EQS state policy.
Thanks so much, Lynn, for that presentation. Before we jump into the next thing, I see one question here. Thanks, Elizabeth, for your question, and feel free others to put them in the chat. How are EQS measured, i.e. accountability for adhering to standards? Do you want to speak to that at all, Lynn, or do you want myself or Amanda to give it a shot?
Probably Amanda could answer that better. I know that we're working
Try
on
one, Amanda.
accountability.
Yeah, the school board policies and such.
Right.
Yeah, so thanks for that question. I think there is currently another area that is another work that is happening is that the Agency of Education is creating some district quality standards, which is the accountability measure. So, and maybe other people from the AOE can talk a little more about that, but that's in the works right now. The current EQS doesn't have an accountability system that we see built into it. There are some, I mean, the school boards are responsible to make sure that that is happening, but there's like no data assessments tied to it. So I think there are some components around school boards have some responsibility, and there are some visits that come, but people can also opt out through a form right now. So I think there's going to be a lot more work happening in that phase in the next few months. So these questions are actually very good that we can compile to give to the state board and to give to for them to think about.
And we have one more question coming in. To what degree will school boards be able to fall back on Act 1 to support their work? Do you want to speak to that one too, Amanda? Or I'm happy to, you probably have more knowledge, but I'm also happy to take these.
Sure. I mean, I think that's what we have to do, right? Like that, I think that a lot of the educators are doing this work already. A lot of the districts are doing this work already in some way or another. And I think this is the way that if you are receiving pushback, that you can say, you know, it is the law, that is the rule, and we have to follow it. So I invite everybody to really read the education quality standards and the changes that we're providing. But I think this is a way forward.
Yeah, and just to build on what Amanda's saying, I do think that like we hope that this document can have the backs of both educators and school boards that are moving in this direction. So when there is pushback, it can kind of like have our backs as educators and community members pushing this work. And also with the recognition that a lot of change in Vermont does happen from not just top down, but combination of top down and bottom up. And so that's part of why we're here today, learning and building relationships, because it is going to take a movement to really make these changes. Lynn, do you want to add to anything? And then we'll go to the next activity, and there'll be plenty of time at the end for more questions too.
Not at this point. I
Cool.
think Amanda answered that well.
So we're going to jump into an activity that actually kind of speaks to what Amanda's talking about in terms of reading the actual changes. So we're not going to read the whole official changes, but we are going to do an activity. What I did was I went through the changes, and to the best of my ability, I pulled out the ways that these changes help specific groups, help all students in general, help students in poverty, help ELL learners, support students of color, support queer and trans students. So we're going to do an activity where folks will take 5 minutes, and no rush. If you don't get through all these, you can also skip around and look at the slides you want. You're going to look at slides 17 to 23. I might put on a little quiet background reading music. And as you're going, you can either jot down or share in the chat. What are some ways these updates are already happening in your school, in our schools, and then envisioning some ways and imagining how these updates can be happening more in our schools. So I'll stop the share, and folks should jump into that PowerPoint, and we'll just take a quiet 5 minutes here to do a little bit of reading and reflecting.
sells wine bracelets. Still no weeping, little man. No, nothing there. It's the best work I ever did. I never did a case like this. It's not enough. I'm gonna go back to order tomorrow. I just feel like this just ain't finished. Detective.
Lisa, can you share the slides or like put it in the chat so that people can see those, please?
Yep, thanks. Just popped them in there again. So folks want to wrap up their reading and reflection time. And we're going to chat a little bit and hear from a couple folks about this question of how is this already happening in our schools and how do you see this happening? And I definitely want to invite folks to either use the raise hand function or just type stack in the chat and I can unmute you to share. Oh, and Elise said, could you define ethnic studies? Great question, Elise. The way I see it is it's particularly kind of like focused on lifting up and centering the histories and identities and cultures and characteristics of folks from different marginalized groups. Traditionally, that's been focused on different racial and ethnic groups. The way we've been doing this work in Vermont is we've also brought in communities with disabilities and folks from the trans and queer communities. And it's often specifically looking at histories of resistance and how people have resisted and survived and fought for justice throughout history and in current tense. And so that's kind of my feelings around it. And Amanda, feel free to add to that too if you'd like.
Yeah, we do have a definition of the actual education quality standards, so I can put in the chat when I find it. So that is the definition that we're working on, the EQS.
Cool. Thanks so much for adding that. Cool. Thanks for naming that everyone has an ethnicity. Yep. But it's specifically focused on those that may have been marginalized or not or underrepresented in traditional histories in schools. So I'll give time for a few folks to comment on like what you saw, what you read about, and how you see that either happening or ways you'd love to see that happening. And feel free again to raise your hand and I can unmute you. Cool. I'm gonna unmute Amanda. Oops. Let's see if this works. Does that work? Awesome.
Did it work? Here I am. Hi. Hi, everybody. Glad to be here. I was really excited to see, I forget which slide, I think one of the first ones, just around the standards as a whole. And one of the things that I noted was some language around parental engagement. And that just felt really impactful and a powerful strategy in this moment when parents are being so weaponized. And so it was the part that made me feel excited and looking toward the future.
Cool. Thanks so much for lifting up. And I'll name too, Amanda is a bit of a special guest here. She recently joined the working group and also works at Outright. So we really appreciate having your voice on the working group. Other thoughts of things that stood out to folks or spoke to folks? Anyone else would like to share those? We'll jump back into this presentation. Okay, Jamila, let's grab you here. All right, thanks so much.
Hey, full disclosure, I am totally being very misbehaved and I'm driving right now. So I'm going to try to find a safe place to pull over. I'm multitasking. But I just wanted to just acknowledge that there's a lot of the things that were listed there are happening in Vermont schools already, as you said, but they're happening based on sort of personal passion. If there's a person in the building that has really championed the work that is happening, right? So I'm super interested in the focus on accountability measures because those of us who are doing the work and are passionate about it are very excited to have this EQS document to support our work, and also looking for to see some more consistency around the way the work is happening across the state, and so those accountability measures are exciting.
Cool. Thanks, Jamila, for joining us on the road and kind of naming that piece around folks that are passionate are already doing a lot of these things in their schools, and that thinking about accountability and how this document and the implementation of it can help push schools that maybe aren't as passionate. And I'll lift up, and Amanda, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think one thing that the Act On Working Group is doing is they're looking at kind of the Vermont State School Board policies, some of which are recommended, and thinking about if some of them need to be updated and or made mandatory. And so speaking to Jamila, I think that's a way that other mechanisms outside this document can help push some of this stuff statewide. Is that accurate, Amanda? Am I? Well, anyone else want to share a little bit about anything that stood out to them or they're excited about? Yeah, go ahead, Amanda.
Yes, we have a committee that has just been created to look at the district policies currently and how we aligns with the EQS and what we will be recommending to the legislature in January about either statutory changes or updates, policies that are currently recommended that should be actually required. So.
Cool. Anyone else like to share? Yeah, and feel free, you can just raise your hand too. Is that, I don't know, Madison? See if that works.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say that having done some of this work and been a recipient of some of the pushback in the community and how difficult that is, I just wanted to say how much I rely on Act One and the individuals that are doing this work to feel good about continuing to want to do this work. That without this and without everyone here that have put in this hard labor since 2019, plus the legislature and how that was pushed forward, like Vermont continues to surprise me as my heart gets broken often. So that's what's really speaking to me about all of this, is it just feels incredibly forward thinking, inclusive, and even the way that this meeting's being run, the language that I hear is so common in other places and meetings I do in Vermont. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks so much, Madison. I appreciate you pointing that out. We're going to jump back into the presentation. There'll be time for additional Q&A around 6 o'clock. So let me get to presentation mode here. So really thinking about how can we take action to support this work. We're going to chat a little bit about that and see some examples. Lynn, do you want to go over this, the timeline?
So in the summer of 2021, an EQS committee was created, and they passed a first draft of the updated standards. In the fall of 2021, the draft was shared with the community members from all over Vermont for feedback. In the winter and spring of 21 and 22, the Act One working group voted on a revised draft of the standards to share with the State Board of Education. So now we're getting into the two places where we kind of are at. We are working with community members all over Vermont to get support for approving the standards at the State Board. Next slide. The Vermont State Board of Education has a committee reviewing the recommended EQS changes. So this fall, we're doing these public forums. The State Board of Education will also be hosting an EQS committee forum in November. And what we're trying to do now is to organize to have people speak out there. Fall of 2022 and winter of 2023, the State Board will take the committee's recommendations and discuss and hopefully approve a version of them. The next steps would be, we will need to work as a Vermont education community to implement these important changes.
Well, thanks, Lynn. And again, as you see this timeline stretching out, I really appreciate all the work that folks on the Act One working group have done, especially Amanda and Mark, the co-chairs, and all the members of the Eqs Subcommittee, which includes Lynn. So appreciate your service and your work. So now we're going to start thinking about giving testimony. The date is not finalized yet, but it sounds like sometime in November, there's going to be a public forum. We want to get a lot of folks out to speak about, like we have been, about why this work is important, lift up the parts that are important to us, give feedback. We may have a certain perspective that we want to give feedback from. And so I wanted to share a little bit about tips for giving testimony. If you've ever given testimony at the State House or at a school board, it may feel a little bit similar to that. So in that link, and I'll share these slides again later, you can find information about upcoming meetings. There's actually public comment at the start of all of these meetings. And the speak out will happen kind of hosted by the EQS subcommittee. So right now there's a full state board and there's a subcommittee that's really looking closely at this work. Some things that have worked for me in the past and for other folks is writing down your testimony word for word. You may think you know exactly what you're going to say, and then when you get there, you get nervous, don't know what to say. So it helps to have it written down, making it personal, sharing stories about why this matters in your classroom and in your school, or from your personal perspective. This is also an opportunity to give feedback to make this work stronger. And oftentimes, this may be different, but oftentimes your feedback may be limited specifically to 2 minutes. And then there's some more tips in this resource from the ACLU here, can be a useful resource. So we're going to spend about 7 minutes drafting some of our own testimony. And one thing I'll point out here, there's talking points for EQS. These are very similar to those slides you just looked at, kind of getting in detail. And this is a space where you can take some kind of prompts to help you start developing your testimony. So we'll take some time to develop our testimony, and then we'll move into small groups and get a little feedback and kind of share some things we like and some places we feel like we need some feedback. So I'll put this document in here. You'll need to make a copy of this, so you'll be able to write in it, because I believe it's view only right now. So I think if you hit File, Make a Copy, you'll be able to do that. Any questions about this next activity? So I'll put a timer on, a little bit of music, folks will do some writing, and then we'll go into groups to be able to share that out. I think we'll do like 6 minutes just to give us enough time for everything. Oh yeah, so a little bit about the body you're speaking to. I think they're mostly pretty sympathetic to this work, but there may be other folks coming out that are not. And so we want to have a really strong voice to show why this matters to us, carrying all our different identities and positions. And so these folks specifically, I don't know, I think there's like 6 or 8 of them. They're all people that are on the State Board of Education. So they've been appointed by the governor, and some of them are like professors of education, former school board members, former school administrators. Amanda, you want to speak a little more to that too?
Yeah, and so, and there's independent schools, there's a few students. So just for there's going to be multiple opportunities to do this. One, right now, the state board has an Eqs subcommittee that was formed to look at the Eqs. So it's not a full state board. They're doing some public comments, and they're going to be doing that. So right now what they're doing is they took a chunk of time to look at our definitions. Then they're looking at instructional practices, and they've invited a few curriculum directors. They're going to be inviting some folks from special education to look at the whole thing. They're going to be looking at the sections. So at any time you can kind of support by saying, this is what's important to me. They currently don't have a meeting schedule. Once they're done with that part, they're gonna go into the full state board. So it's like stage 2, where the full state board then will, and then the rule changes opens. And what that means is that they will have to have like public forums around this. Right now, the EQS subcommittee is kind of like a smaller. They're kind of looking, they will make recommendations to changes. Some of the definitions, for example, we have changed back and forth. And then so once they're done with the revision and process, it goes back to a full state board, which then opens the rule process. So the State Board of Education is appointed by the governor. There are different people from independent schools, teachers, UVM professor, community members, and students. And so that's who the body is.
Again, hey everyone, welcome back. I hope folks had great conversations. I have a couple slides to wrap things up, and then we'll do a Q&A. And folks are welcome to stay on the Q&A and also share a little more about their conversations. But I want to also wrap it up on time for folks that want to step out in a minute. So let me share the screen again, and hope people made some good connections. It's always fun to go in the breakout rooms. So I'll email this out as well, but I have a little bit of a sample letter template for folks that want to take action now. They're welcome to take this and make it into a bit of their own words and send a letter about why this work matters. Amanda said that the most upcoming EQS subcommittee meeting is not posted, but when it is, she will text me and I can email everyone here if they would like to attend that. We also have this action pledge, which is great for folks to fill out. That way I have everyone's info, and when the speak out happens, you'll be the first to know. So we have this, and you can also encourage other folks to fill this out that might want to get on a list to know about the speak out. Other actions you can take if you'd like to host an info session, I'm happy to work with folks to do that. Publicly endorse, share your story. We now have a comms person, and we may be gathering some stories of why this work matters to folks and helping blast those out in preparation for the speak out. And then let me actually make this editable. I would love to get a little bit of feedback from folks because we're always trying to improve our presentations. So this is now editable. If folks would like to share any feedback around takeaways from today, maybe something you learned in your breakout room, pluses, things that went well, deltas, things that went better. And we really appreciate everyone coming out today. I'm going to stop the screen so folks can look at this on their own screen. And I'm also going to stop the recording.